This is session 4 of a business ethics tutorial. In the previous 3 sessions, I talked to you about why we have ethics, and I presented to you very briefly a framework for making ethical choices based on 3 conditions for a rational choice. Now I want to begin to show you some examples, because it's in working through the examples that we actually learn how to apply ethical principles, and it's also a lot more fun too. So this time I'm going to take you through 6 relatively easy examples to show how this stuff works out in practice. In the last 2 sessions, we'll look at more complicated case studies in the business world. So these are my cases: boarding a plane, the ambulance, a cashier's error, a damaged car, the boss's expense account, and cheap stuffing. Now, I'm going to go through these rather quickly. It's important to see a wide variety of cases to understand how to apply ethics. So as a result, I'm taking you through as many as possible, which means I'm going to have to go faster than you can follow me. So I suggest you come back and go through these again 3 or 4 times, think them over, and see if you can follow the arguments offline. The first one, boarding the plane. We've all had this experience, I'm sure. So I have a zone printed on my ticket. I'm zone 4. Okay. To expedite boarding, the airline has assigned some people to come in first in zone 1. These are the guys in the back of the plane, next to the windows, and so forth, for the purpose of expediting boarding, so we don't have to crawl over each other to get on the plane. Well, I noticed that the ticket agent is not actually checking the zones. So you can get by with going in too early. I can go in early if I want to. No one will see me. And it happens I have a rather large carry-on bag, and I'd like to put that up in the overhead, and if I go in as zone 4, there's not going to be any space left up there. So I think I'm just going to go in before my zone. Is that okay? Okay, that's the issue before us. Let's first apply the generalization test. Well, I have to look at my reasons. Why am I doing this? There's a couple of reasons. I want to find space for my bag in there. Okay. And secondly, no one's checking. I can get away with it. Now, this doesn't seem to be generalizable offhand, because if everyone did this, it wouldn't work anymore, would it? All those guys would be ahead of me. But let's think about exactly why it's not generalizable. So we're going to make 2 or 3 attempts to apply the generalization test to this. First, I might say, I wouldn't want everyone else to do this, because if they did, then they would get ahead of me. But that's not the generalization test. Okay? It doesn't matter what I want. What I want is not the test. The test is whether my reasons are consistent with the assumption that everyone else with the same reasons acts the same way. It's not about what I want. Well, let's try again. Attempt number 2. Well, if everyone who has a bag like mine were to try to board early, it would defeat the purpose of having the zone system, right? The guys who are in the back and next to the windows wouldn't be going in first. It'd all be crawling over each other. It would defeat the purpose of the whole system. Maybe that's the problem here. Well, it's true. It would defeat the purpose of the system. It wouldn't work anymore. But that's not why the action isn't generalizable for me. I have to check whether it would defeat my purpose. And my purpose is to get my bag overhead in the cabin. Okay? Well, let's try again. Well, if everyone with a large bag like mine, were to board early when they could get away with it, then either I would no longer be assured of finding a space for my bag because they would get ahead of me, or the airline would start checking the tickets to make sure you don't board early. One or the other would happen. Well, those happen to be my 2 reasons for doing it. They're not checking, and I want to get my bag in there and find space. So the assumption that everyone else does the same thing and has the same reasons is inconsistent with my reasons for doing it myself. That's the test. So I failed the test. Okay? That's how you apply it. There's also a utilitarian test here. Okay, suppose I board early, even though I'm zone 4. Well, I'm going to slow things down a little bit, right? Because someone's going to have to crawl over me, to get into their seat. So that's a slight decrease in utility. Now, the effect on the bag space is nil. Okay? I find more space for my bag, but someone else finds less space for their bag, so that evens out. But there is a slight reduction, in the convenience of getting on the plane. So it's a slight violation of the utilitarian test, too. So it's a pretty easy case, right? I shouldn't do it. Although it seems to me when I travel that a lot of people in the airport don't seem to think this way. They board early. So I asked myself the question, if we can't even agree on how we should board a plane, how can we agree on how to solve the national debt problem? And maybe we should start with the basics and work up. All right, case number 2, the ambulance. So I'm an emergency paramedic. I drive an ambulance. Well, it happens I have an appointment with my boss, and I'm not going to make it because the traffic's heavy out there. So I decide, well, I'm just going to use the siren and lights, and I'll get there on time. Is that ethical? Well, it's probably illegal. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, it's legal. I just want to know if it's ethical. Now, you're saying, of course it's not ethical. Well, why? Why isn't it? Let's look at it. Let's try the generalization test first. What are my reasons? Well, the siren will get me there on time. Otherwise, the traffic is too heavy and I'll be late. And secondly, I'm supposing, I guess, that no one's going to know. No one's going to catch me at this. I'm not going to lose my job for it. Okay? Now, let's generalize. Suppose that every emergency worker, a medical worker, who has an appointment with the boss, and there's heavy traffic and won't get caught, decides to turn on the siren. Now, how often did this happen? Well, maybe once or twice a year in a given city. So is this going to cause a problem? Suppose it happens once or twice a year in the city that an ambulance driver abuses the siren. Are people going to get cynical about ambulances and not pay attention to the siren? No. Right? It won't make any difference. So it is generalizable. So what's the problem here? Does that say it's okay? Well, the problem here is that I've drawn the scope too narrow. Remember the scope? We talked about Gertrude Grosvenor, using her name as an excuse to steal a watch. Well, I'm doing that here, okay? The reason that I'm using the siren is not simply that I have an appointment with my boss or there's heavy traffic. The real reason is that I'm late and I want to get there. I'm in a hurry, right? If it were something else, why wouldn't I do the same thing? Okay, suppose it were a job interview. Or suppose I have a flight, I'm late for the flight. Or suppose it's not heavy traffic, but I lost my keys in the parking lot and I had to find them. And there's 1,000 different ways I could be late and be in a hurry. Why wouldn't I use the siren for those? Well, there's no reason I wouldn't. I would. Now, I might insist. I wouldn't do it in that case. I would only do it in this particular case. But actually, that's not precisely the test. I don't have to psychoanalyze myself to figure out what I would do psychologically. I simply have to ask, what are my reasons? Why would I use the siren for an appointment with the boss when I wouldn't use the siren to meet a flight on time? Why? Oh, no. Well, I got to have a reason. Okay, I'm making a distinction. So if this is going to be my reason, I got to articulate. I got to know what it is. Since I don't know what it is, my reason is simply I want to get there. I'm in a hurry. And then it's not generalizable. So that's how you apply the scope reasoning to a case like this. Utilitarian test, let's see how that goes. Well, I might reason, if everyone did this, then, people would ignore ambulance sirens and you wouldn't be able to get sick people to the hospital and they would die. And that's negative utility, boy, that's bad. But that's not the utilitarian test, right? The test is not if everyone did it, but just the consequences of my action, my particular action, okay? But even in my case, if I'm screaming through traffic, with my siren going, I create a risk of an accident, okay? And that creates negative expected utility. There may not be an accident, but if you multiply the probability of an accident by the utility that results, which is very negative, you get a negative expected utility. And that probably outweighs the positive utility of my getting to my appointment on time. After all, I could call up the boss and say I'm going to be 10 minutes late. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if I have a patient in the back of the ambulance, then probably the negative utility of taking the risk is outweighed by the importance of getting this guy to the hospital. So it's okay in a situation like that. So I'm failing utilitarian test too. And finally, virtue ethics. Well, what is my career here? I've devoted my career to saving people's lives, making them well, by this dangerous job of driving an ambulance around. It's a very high-stress career, but I've devoted my life to that. And here, I'm using the siren to create a risk of injury when it's unnecessary. That's contrary to who I am. That's contrary to what I'm all about. So I have a problem with virtue there as well. Okay, so I'm batting 0. I failed all 3 tests. All right, let's go to another one. You'd be surprised how many people ask me about this little case. So I'm going to the department store, and I buy several expensive items. And one of them is a camcorder. It costs $600. And I get home, I look at the ticket, and I realize the cashier forgot to ring up that $600. What do I do about it? Is it okay just to let it ride? Well, we're inclined to say, no, you should pay for it. Well, let's think about why. Well, the reason's pretty simple, right? I have a sales contract, right? Now, when I went through the checkout with this camera, okay, I am making an agreement to pay the store $600 in exchange for getting the camera. That's the sales agreement. Now, it's true, it's not listed on the receipt. There's no camera on the receipt. But the receipt is not a contract. Okay? The receipt is a receipt, not a contract. Okay? You might say, well, it's a gift. You know, they didn't charge me for it. They must be giving it to me. So it's okay. Yeah, but a gift has to be intentional, right? When you give someone, you mean to give it. They didn't mean to give me this thing. So it's not a gift either. It's just a mistake on their part. Nonetheless, I haven't honored my terms of the contract until I pay for it. So that's very simple. Okay, so far so good. Now, suppose it's not a $600 camcorder, but a 25-cent pack of gum. Now what? If I get home and I find out I didn't pay for a 25-cent pack of gum, am I supposed to get in my gas-guzzling SUV and drive all the way across town, you know, and pay for this 25-cent pack of gum? No. Why? You know, a contract is a contract. It shouldn't matter what the amount is, you know, if I'm serious about this ethics stuff. So how do we get out of that one? Well, the situation here is that remember that you can nullify or change a contract by mutual consent, and that's generalizable. So suppose I were to ring up the manager of the store and say, you know what, I didn't pay for that 25-cent pack of gum. Is it okay if I just keep it? What would he say? He'd say, sure, don't worry about it, goodness. So in other words, I have mutual consent, right? Now, I'm absolutely certain that the guy would consent, and therefore he does consent. Now, it's, you know, if it's a $10 item, I'm not so certain. You know, I gotta check it out. But if it's 25 cents, I'm certain he would consent, and that's what mutual consent is. So that's generalizable. That's how you handle that one. Another one. This case, I got this one from an MBA student. I have about 300 of these cases from MBA students. This is one of them. Okay. So I'm buying a car. So I go to the dealership, and I want to buy a new car and trade in my old car. So I negotiate with the dealer. And, well, we arrive at a price for the new car and a trade-in price for the old car, okay? Now, I'm not sure that I like the price. I'm hesitating. So the salesman says, hey, why don't you take this lunch voucher, drive down the street to the restaurant, have a nice lunch, think it over, then come back and let me know. I say, okay, free lunch, can't turn that down. So I drive down and have a lunch. Well, on the way back to the car dealership, I have a little fender bender, little accident. So I get out and look at the car, and from a distance you don't see any problem. But you look up close, I'm going to have to replace the bumper. And I'm figuring, you know, once you add everything up, this is going to be a $1,000 job. You know how body work is. It really adds up. But you don't see it from a distance. So I say, okay, so I drive the car on back to the dealership. I sort of park out at the edge of the parking lot, you know, far from the entrance. And the salesman doesn't notice any damage on my car. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? During lunch, I got out my BlackBerry and I looked at the book value of this used car. He offered me a price that was $1,000 below book value for this thing. So, why don't I just not mention the damage? I just won't mention it. I mean, after all, don't we have this principle, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware? You know, it's his responsibility to check out this car. All right? And besides, you know, this is only fair because he offered me $1,000 lowball bid. We're just making that up now. Is this okay? Well, let's see if it is. Let's apply utilitarian test first. Okay, do I increase utility by not mentioning the damage? Probably do. Okay, because, you know, the dealership has to fix it. You know, they can fix it for less than $1,000, right? Because that price is inflated for the insurance. And besides, they can afford it, right? You know, the guy who owns this dealership, he has this huge mansion up there in the North Hills. He won't even notice it. But me, you know, I'm just a teacher. You know, $1,000 is a lot of money to me. So I actually, you know, would gain more than they would lose if I don't mention the damage. So yeah, I'm passing that test. So we're okay there. All right. Generalization test. Now, the problem here is that I seem to be violating a sales agreement, right? I agreed to turn in this car in exchange for that amount of money. But I'm bringing a car back that's different than the car the dealer looked at when he made the offer. Now, you might argue, well, yeah, but it's almost the same. It's really the same car. Maybe a little bit in the bumper's bent. Maybe that's, it's still the same car. Well, suppose I had brought the car in totaled. Okay, had it towed in by a wrecker. That wouldn't be the same car. That would be a breach of the agreement. Okay? Well, the fact that the damage is minor is still, a breach of the agreement. Okay. Now, you might argue, by the way, breaching an agreement is not generalizable. We've talked about that, right? Breaching a sales agreement. Now, I may argue, suppose I hadn't had the accident. If I had brought the car back, without an accident, it would still have a little wear and tear. I would have wore the tires down a little bit, have maybe a couple of bugs on the windshield that weren't there before. This isn't the same car either. Does that make it a breach of the agreement? Well, no, of course not, because the dealer told me to drive it to lunch, right? He's expecting wear and tear on the car. That's part of the deal, but he's not expecting a damaged bumper. That's not part of the deal. So it's pure and simple a violation of a sales agreement. Now, how about the book value argument? It's really a fair deal because he made me an offer that was too low anyway, by about the same amount. Well, first of all, I don't know what fair means. How do we tell what's fair? People have all sorts of ideas about what's fair. This is why we have these three conditions for a rational choice. We know what they mean. We know how to apply them. I don't know what fair means, so it doesn't help me. And besides, maybe the offer was too low. If I don't like it, I shouldn't accept it, right? Once I accept the offer, it's a deal, okay? Too low or too high, it's my choice to accept it or not. All right, it's still part of the agreement, high or low. Okay, scorecard, generalization test, not mentioning the damage fails, but it passes utilitarian test. All right, now another one. This is also from an MBA student. Okay, so I'm working at this company, and my boss asked me to accompany him on a trip to San Francisco. That sounds like fun, nice city. And so I booked my flight through the company travel agent. So I go up to the agent and book my flight. And the agent says, I'm looking at this trip, and I see there's a third party going with you guys. So I look at the name, and I recognize the name of my boss's wife. Now, she has a different surname than my boss, so the agent doesn't realize what's going on. But I know what's going on. He's taking her along for a little holiday at company expense. What do I do about this? Just let it ride? Should I report it to the company? You wouldn't believe how many instances of this dilemma I get in my classes. It happens all the time. What do you do when the boss is, doing something questionable? All right. There are two issues here. The first one is the boss doing something unethical? That's the easy one. And the second issue is, should I report it to the company? Okay, let's take them one at a time. Okay, the first one. Is the boss doing something unethical? Well, he's deceiving the company, right? He's leading the company to believe that this third party is there for business reasons. That's deception. Deception is not generalizable. Everyone deceived people just for their personal convenience. You wouldn't be able to deceive people anymore. They wouldn't believe you. Everyone would be checking up on you. Everything you say, everything you do, they would check up because everyone deceives all the time. Okay, so the only reason you can deceive the company is that not everyone does this all the time. That's not generalizable. So it's deception, pure and simple. Furthermore, it's a violation of his agreement with the company, right? If you take on a job with a company, you agree implicitly to abide by the company rules. So it's a violation of his agreement, his employment agreement with the company too. So that's an easy one. That's clearly not generalizable. Okay. Now, is it okay for me to keep quiet about this? Okay. Well, first, what's the utilitarian outcome? What would happen if I were to go to the company and report on my boss? It's hard to tell, right? I might get in real trouble with the boss. He may take it out on me. He may get me fired. Who knows? Or I could become a hero, for tracking down fraud and corruption. I might get promoted by the higher-ups. I have no idea. And unfortunately, this is the way it is with whistleblowing cases. This is a small case of whistleblowing, internal whistleblowing. Whistleblowing cases are the ones I hate. They're the hardest ones in the world because you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. It's a loose cannon out there. The whistleblowing cases are horrible. This is a small one. So from a utilitarian point of view, it's just completely unpredictable. No matter how much I research it, I'm not going to know what's going to happen, probably. So we have to say we passed that test because it's not unreasonable to assume that I would maximize utility by keeping quiet about this. There's no good reason to say otherwise. All right. Is this generalizable to keep quiet about it? Well, if it's part of my job, to monitor, the accounts of the company, then of course it's not generalizable because I have an agreement with the company, part of my employment agreement, to keep track of these things. But it's not part of my job. It's not part of my job. There are other people who do those things. Now, so given that, let's generalize. Let's suppose that employees never were to report on their boss about routine, padding of the expense account. Employees never report on their bosses about that. Would they still be able to achieve the purposes of not reporting? Well, what's the purpose? The purpose, I guess, is to stay out of trouble and not get fired. Would they still be able to stay out of trouble and not get fired if employees never reported on their bosses, cheating the company on expense accounts? Well, sure. Sure they would. Yeah. Because there are mechanisms to catch this. The company's not going to go bankrupt. If the company went bankrupt, I'd be in problem. I wouldn't be able to keep my job if the company went bankrupt. Companies went bankrupt when this happened. Everyone did it. So, yeah, it is generalizable. Okay. So I can go to San Francisco and have a good time and forget all about my boss and what he's doing. Now, you can't extend this to other cases, right? So if I find out, that the company controller is cooking the books and there's nobody around whose job it is to check this, and I happen to know about it, and if people never reported such things, such high-level fraud, we start having Enrons and things like that, it would destroy the economy, okay, that's different. But in the case of a boss's expense account, it's generalizable. All right. The scorecard here, not saying anything, passes all the tests. Now, there might be a virtue ethics question here. Well, there is a virtue at stake. I have some loyalty obligations to my boss, perhaps. Okay, but loyalty would actually encourage me not to speak up, so I'm okay there. You might argue I have a loyalty obligation to the company. I should be loyal to the company by speaking up. No, loyalty only applies to human beings. You're loyal to human beings, not to organizations. Okay, so there's no such thing as loyalty to a company. I'm sorry. It's not there in virtue ethics, only to human beings. Because, you can be human without having any loyalty to organizations, right? You may not even be a member of an organization. You can still be human. That's the reason. But you can't be human without having no loyalty obligation to other humans, at least your family or your spouse or something, to be a human being. So organizations' loyalty is not necessary for humanity. But loyalty to other human beings is necessary to our humanity. All right, the final case. Okay, this sounds like a simple case, but I love it because it's not simple. Okay, it's sort of a humdrum case, but it really has some interesting aspects to help us think about ethics. So this is about a furniture company. I should say, by the way, this case came from an Arthur Andersen collection of ethics case studies. Now, you may remember Arthur Andersen is the company that went down with Enron because of their questionable accounting activities. It had been a very upstanding company, an important force in the accounting world, but basically they lost their accounting licenses and essentially went out of business. Ironically, shortly before doing that, the Andersen company had funded with several $1 million a business ethics project, and part of that was the creation of about 80 case studies. And I'm going to show you one of them here. If you want to see the others, go to my website. You just Google my name. There's a link to ethics materials, and you can see the Arthur Andersen case studies. This is one of them. Okay, so I'm a furniture manufacturer, and I have a reputation for high-quality upholstered furniture. Very good brand name. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we've had an economic downturn. We're having a recession. And the company has to cut costs. So the company's going to decide, we're going to put some cheaper stuffing in those sofas, a cheaper grade of stuffing that we've been using before. Now, customers have come to expect high quality out of our furniture. They know this furniture will last because the stuffing is high quality. But we're going to substitute, without saying anything, we're going to substitute cheap stuffing and sell it under the same brand name for the same price. Now, just to make this clean, I'm going to suppose that we have never said in our ads, in our promotional material, in our conversations with customers, we have never claimed the stuffing is high quality. We've never claimed that. All right? It's just that customers know, they have found out over the years it's high quality because it holds up. So the issue here is whether it's ethical for me to betray my brand name in some sense by substituting low quality. So I'm not saying anything false here. I'm not going against my advertising. I'm simply changing the quality inconsistent with the brand name. Is that ethical? Okay, let's have a look at that. Well, an underlying issue obviously is whether it's deceptive. Okay, am I deceiving the customer by doing this? And generally deception, as we said before, is not generalizable. Now, to deceive someone, you don't actually have to tell a lie. Okay, deception is causing someone to believe something that you know is false. Okay, so for example, if I get a lab report from my doctor, and the doctor, when he sent these lab reports, he looked over them, says, well, they all look good, you're healthy, except for that spot on the chest x-ray. Ooh, cancer. You know what? I'm going to leave that one out. I'm not going to get the guy upset. So I get this lab report and everything is hunky-dory. Okay, everything in that report is true. The doctor is not lying to me, but he's deceiving me. He's leading me to believe I'm healthy when he knows that that's false. Okay, that's deception. Okay, so you can deceive without lying. Is that what's going on here? Are we deceiving the customer without actually lying to the customer? So we've got to address that issue. Well, we are if the customer would expect us to update them on the quality of the stuffing. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Suppose, for example, that you ask if you can come see me in my office. And I say, yeah, tomorrow I'll be in the office all day. You can come see me. Well, tonight I changed my mind. I'm not going to be here. But I neglect to tell you about it. Okay? I know you're coming, but I don't tell you about it. Okay? And you show up and I'm not here. That's deception, right? Because you would expect me to update you as to whether I'm here if I know I'm not going to be here. Okay. So the question here in the case of the furniture, would the customer expect to be updated about the quality of the material? Well, of course, if there's a tag on the furniture that has the specifications about the stuffing, yeah, you would expect to be updated. But we're assuming that that's not there. The company has never claimed in any way anything about the quality of the stuffing. So would the customer expect the salesman to say, if I walk into the furniture store, let me just tell you before you come in, we've changed the quality of this stuffing? Now, some salespeople might do that. But would he expect it? No. You don't expect companies to do that. You just don't expect it. So there's no clear case here for deception. Now, it's true that the company created this impression, the company created this reputation. Okay? The company is causing me to believe the quality is high by manufacturing high-quality sofas in the past. That's true. They're causing me to believe this. But at the time that they were manufacturing high-quality sofas, they were high-quality sofas, right? They weren't causing me to believe something that they knew was false when they actually created the high-quality sofas. So they're not causing me to believe something that they knew was false at the time. So there's no clear case for deception. Okay, so we can't get them there. How about we try applying the generalization test directly to this situation of the quality of the merchandise. Okay, even if we grant there's no deception involved, maybe there's another problem. Okay, well, suppose that companies always reduce the quality of their merchandise in an economic downturn without telling the customer. Suppose they always do this. Well, what would happen? Well, customers would catch on to it, right? They would know. You walk into a furniture store during a recession, you would know that these guys have gone on the cheap now because companies always do this. We found this out. So you're probably going to be less likely to pay that price for the furniture. Sales are going to drop because people are going to know the quality is less. Okay. Now, how about the generalizability of the company's decision? It depends on the reason. If the company's reason is simply, say, to cut costs, cut production costs, would they still be able to cut production costs if everyone else did it too? Sure, they wouldn't sell as many sofas, but they could nonetheless cut production costs. So it generalizes. So if their reason is simply to cut production costs, then we're okay. It's generalizable. However, I think that's not the whole reason. Okay, part of the reason is that they want to cut production costs and maintain the sales. That's why they're not saying anything about it. Okay, and that's not generalizable, because if everyone did this, they would not be able to maintain the sales. The customers would be wise to it. So they can get away with this only if their reason is simply to cut production costs, even if sales would drop. So what do we have to say? Their reason is generalizable if they would still be willing, to reduce the quality without saying anything, if sales were to drop, if they did that, to the same extent they would drop if all the other merchants did the same thing. Got that? Okay, I'm going to read the slide because it's a little bit hard to follow. The company can ethically reduce quality without alerting customers if the company would still be willing to reduce quality if this caused sales to fall to the level that would result if all sellers did the same. If that's true, if they would still do it, even under that condition, then their reason is simply to cut production costs, and the action is generalizable. That's how you tell. So the conclusion is a little bit complicated, isn't it? Sometimes it gets complicated. Okay, so that's today's session. Next time we're going to look at some business case studies. See you then.